then again there was a powerful synergy with motor racing, because you wanted to make the car as light as possible and as strong as possible.
The synergy was everywhere. Whenever old racing cars are dusted off and gathered together, the ghosts of aeroplanes come too. Car cockpits bear a striking resemblance to cockpits of aircraft. Large ducted radiators, cooled high-performance engines, big bore exhausts look at home on a Hawker Nimrod and a Maserati. Spoked wheels offered lightness and strength on both. Streamlining smoothed air round undercarriages, and was famously applied to cars. Even details like wire locking nuts to prevent loosening through vibration was common. For on-the-spot maintenance and repair, quick-release fastenings held on riveted aluminium skins. Wing struts on this 1931 Avro Tutor biplane are aerodynamically profiled like the suspension struts on a Williams racing car, built 60 years later. Most important of all, aviation was an object lesson to motor racing, in showing how to pack large high-performance engines into confined spaces. For the Germans, the development of aircraft engines had been forbidden since 1919. In a reverse of the normal situation, where aircraft technology finds its way into racing cars, the German racing cars helped to keep engine technology up to date. In 1937, Messerschmitts were fitted with Daimler-Benz 12-cylinder supercharged engines. A little later, direct fuel injection was added. The parallels with racing car engines were obvious. Less than a decade after the end of the war, Mercedes-Benz was back in racing. Their W196 was almost unbeatable. Direct fuel injection on an 8-cylinder engine had clear aircraft origins. 10 years earlier, there was another make of car racing for Nazi Germany. The Auto Union was very different. Its designer, Ferdinand Porsche, was convinced that moving the engine behind the driver was a better layout for a racing car. Auto Unions first appeared in 1934. They were unique. The fuel tank sat between the driver and the supercharged 16-cylinder engine. A tubular frame also carried coolant from the radiator at the front to the engine at the rear. The Spartan cockpit owed everything to aircraft design of the time. By 1937, Grand Prix racing, dominated by the German factory teams, was heading towards speeds of 320 kilometers an hour. New rules limiting the cars to a maximum weight of 750 kilograms were imposed to stop this. It was supposed to limit the size and power of engines. But the development of high-strength, lightweight alloys, better streamlining, and smaller components meant the restrictions had little effect. Mercedes-Benz benefited most. Porsche's cars had built-in problems. The revolutionary suspension and tall, heavy engines made his cars fearsomely difficult to handle. The futuristic engine behind the driver idea would be neglected for almost 20 years. 1951. Up-and-coming young drivers mingle with more experienced old hands and autograph hunters. All day, teams arrive at an old airfield called Silverstone. for the British Grand Prix. The cars now conform to regulations, known as Formula One. All of the competing cars now have engines conventionally mounted at the front.
It was rather shambolic sport primarily for wealthy amateurs. And they were enjoying themselves, and there was no discipline, there was comparatively little organisation. The lack of safety, when you look back, was absolutely frightening. The engine was in front of the car, the driver wore a t-shirt and a linen helmet and cotton trousers, he had no safety belts. There were no gravel traps, there was no Armco. There was over 100,000 people at Silverstone for the first Grand Prix after the war, and just a piece of rope between them and the cars, and it's a miracle that there weren't mass fatalities.
The spectators behind the ropes were unlikely to see a yellow car win a Grand Prix. In the races of the early 1950s, red cars, the traditional racing colour of Italy, had the best engines and won the most races.
The dominance of Italy and Ferrari and Maserati in the 1950s was associated with the engine and the position of the engine at the front of the car. And that's how Formula One was in the 1950s. Except for one guy. There's one guy, John Cooper, who put his engine at the back. And that wasn't in Formula One, that was in Formula 3, which are these funny little cars, engine at the back, motorbike engine. And no one would have guessed then that that was the future.
The future of post-war Formula One started in 1947 in the back of a garage in the London suburb of Surbiton. Engineer John Cooper, seen here in the middle, designed and built cars for the aptly named poor man's racing formula, Formula 3. His recipe for a racing car involved welding the front ends of two scrap Fiat 500s together, then adding some tubes. Cooper put the engine behind the driver for the simple reason that in Formula 3 power was transmitted from motorcycle engines by chain, and the shorter the chain to the rear wheels, the better. With the weight of the engine and the driver equally distributed between the wheels, his cars were inherently well balanced. John Cooper's cars did a roaring trade among amateur drivers, wanting something cheap and reliable at the weekends.
He was an engineer, he knew exactly what he was doing. He knew the benefits of putting the engine where he did. I'm sure he'd seen the Auto Union and the very few other rear-engine racing cars that there had been before the war, and thought that he could do it better.
Monaco, for the first Grand Prix of the season in Europe. The big names of motor racing line up to take their measure for the season. Brabham now second.
By 1958, Cooper was doing better. His ideas developed into Formula 2 cars, and then Formula 1. Despite having less horsepower than the competition, the Coopers had better balance and could corner faster, and were beginning to worry the Italians.
The duel for supremacy is fought out in grim earnest.
Little by little, Cooper had finished the job that Porsche had started. With his pre-war rear-engined Auto Unions.
He couldn't catch Jack Brabham showing the form for the season by winning in the Cooper Climax.
Within a handful of years, Cooper had got into Formula One with half an engine really in terms of power, but the formula was